What's up, everybody? Welcome back. We're here with some more DraftKings picks, MMA, DFS advice, FanDuel lineup tips, best bets, everything you need for UFC 301. The UFC said, how could we possibly follow up UFC 300? It's with the Steve Erceg main event. And we're here to help you break it down. So, welcome. I am Brian Jester, co founder here at Occupy Fantasy, joined by Jake the Snake, as always, owner of MMADFS.com, a noted Pantoja supporter. Jake, I believe you've now Pantoja's earned it for you. You've made some money on Pantoja now, and we're here with another one of his fights. How you doing today?
Yeah, man, I'm doing good, man. Yeah, I definitely owe the guy a beer sometime. Made a decent amount of money off him. Even if I go 100% on him in this slate and lose everything, I will still be up on Pantoja a lifetime. So always like a good Pantoja slate.
There we are, and we have one, and we have 13 fights. Was 14. Fight was canceled today after some weigh-ins. But what we're gonna do, if you are new here, we'll break down this main event, Pantoja versus Erceg, from a betting and DFS perspective. We will talk about the three newcomers making their first trip to the octagon in the UFC, what they bring to the table. We'll play good fighter, good matchup, bad matchup for the other fighters on the card that have less than 4 fights in the UFC, give some context to their stats and their fight logs. And then we'll close out the show with our underdog fantasy pick and play of the slate, a fight that you have to target in DFS. Whoever wins is likely to score extremely well. You won't want to miss that. And we'll close it out with our stream parlay of the week. We pick a side, total, or prop, parlay it together, win something of our choosing. This week is a pretty big one, so a lot of big odds this week. Parlay together. Stick around to the end for that. So let's start with the main event, Jake. I alluded to it. I didn't even allude to it. I just thought I said it. Erceg somehow earning the main event here. Break it down for me, because you and I were talking off stream, and obviously it's tough to get it past the bias, but you look at everything logically as well. And I think we both agree that we thought the lines should be higher, and just me from having years and years and years and years of gambling background, that it makes you take a second look when you see a line that doesn't look right. And Pantoja, not one of the biggest favorites on this card, on a card filled with big favorites. So tell me what you see about this fight, and then more importantly, what does it mean for DFS?
Yeah, it is kind of funny. The line opened with Erceg at plus 185, and it's actually been bet down to plus 150 since then. But I don't know. I feel like the field kind of always hates Pantoja. Like people are picking Moreno, people are picking Royval, even though he'd already beaten both of them.
Well,
So I mean, I
he
feel like
hasn't beaten
that's not.
Erceg yet, so maybe that's the key. That's why the line is so short now.
Yeah, it's not a rematch, right? I don't know. I feel like Pantoja always has the bad body language that people want to bet against. You know, he always looks tired in the middle of fights, and he is, but he still manages to push through it. You know, he's been 10 straight rounds of title title fight action, and he was still pushing hard and winning late, still grappling late in those fights. So even when he's tired, even when his body language looks like he's exhausted, he's still able to grapple because he's one of the best grapplers on the planet. He just turned 34 years old. He's 11-3 in the UFC. He's a really aggressive striker in addition to being, a really good grappler. He's super durable. He's never been finished in 32 pro fights. Trains at one of the best gyms in the world at American Top Team. This is his second title defense. He won the belt against Moreno in 2023, defended against Royval. Like we said, both those were rematches. He actually has 3 wins over Moreno now. So this is actually a fresh matchup for once, which is hard because, he's cleaned out the flyweight division for the most part. Not all the guys he's faced are even still there anymore, but he's beaten most of them. And the guys he hasn't beaten are injured. So basically, that's why Erceg is getting a shot here, despite being the number 10 ranked flyweight in the world. Erceg wasn't even in the UFC a year ago, which is kind of crazy. He's already getting a shot. But in terms of just to wrap up Pantoja, in terms of DFS, massive scoring potential. 143 DraftKings points in each of his last 2 decision wins, 145 and 130 points on FanDuel there. So crazy scoring potential. Going to be super popular. And then on the other side, yeah, we got Erceg coming in. So number 10 ranked Erceg, 28 years old, 3-0 in the UFC. He made his short notice UFC debut against David Dvorak in June 2023. Dvorak was ranked number 10 at the time, but also came into that matchup on a 2-fight losing streak. Now hasn't won a fight since 2021. So the hasn't aged especially well. It was a 29-28 decision win for Erceg, not like the most impressive win. He did have Dvorak hurt, almost got him out of there, didn't quite get him out. Then he faces Alessandro Kafta, who's on the slate, who's stepping in on short notice and who's 1-2 in the UFC. Again, Erceg wins a close 29-28 decision. Not super impressive, but then he comes in, he knocks out Matt Schnell in his last fight, which was only 9 weeks ago. So pretty quick turnaround. Gets the highlight knockout left hook against Matt Schnell. I mean, you just got to remember, like, everyone finishes Matt Schnell. He's been finished in almost 6 of his official UFC losses. He's only won 1 out of his last 5 fights. Like, yes, it was a highlight reel impressive finish, and yes, it showed improved striking from Erceg, but also look at who it came against. I mean, it was Schnell. So I would say Erceg's still pretty largely unproven in the UFC. You know, he is well rounded. He's a good grappler. Definitely has improved his striking. He's pretty big for the division. He's 5'8" at 125 pounds. Like he's like a normal sized person, but at 125 pounds. So he's talented, but he's not as good a grappler as Pantoja. He doesn't have the experience of Pantoja. Neither guy's ever been knocked out, but I'd say he's not as durable, based on the guys he's fought. It's a really quick turnaround. He's only had 2 months to prepare. He's never been past the 3rd round in his career, so we don't really know what his late round cardio will look like. I remember there was that one fight where he went up to 135 pounds with Eternal MMA, and he was definitely looking exhausted in the 3rd round of that fight. So, I mean, just something to consider. It was up a weight class against a little bit bigger opponent, but late in round 2 and then into round 3, he was definitely exhausted there. So who knows how his cardio is going to look in a longer fight. He doesn't even know. He's never been in a 5-round fight. So that's something to consider. I mean, at the same time, obviously, we talked about the Pantoja body language, but he's shown he can go 5 rounds, whereas Erceg has not. So that's obviously an unknown. But in terms of Erceg for DFS, I think if he wins, he's going to end up in the optimal lineup at a cheap price tag. Pantoja is super high volume. It's going to be a high-paced fight. There's going to be a lot of grappling, a lot of striking. I can't really think of a situation where Erceg wins this fight and gets left out unless we have it would have to be one of the most crazy high-scoring slates where multiple underdogs go off. It's just hard to see, and I don't even think we get that many underdog winners. So I think it's pretty safe to say if Erceg wins, he's in the winning lineup. I don't think he wins, man. I'm ready to push my chips on Pantoja here once again. I don't know, man. I don't want to jinx it, but it just seems like it's set up for Pantoja to get the win in his home country of Brazil, and they just needed a guy in Erceg to fill a slot because Alex Pereira was supposed to headline this card. They shifted him to UFC 300, and then they're like, all right, well, the only other Brazilian champion, Pantoja, who's he going to fight? They wanted Mikhaev to fight him, but Mikhaev lays an egg against Perez. Then they're like, all right, well, we can't give him the title shot, and it was Ramadan. So then they're looking down the list, and they're like, beat him, injured, beat him, beat him, Tim Elliott, whatever. Steve Erceg. Okay, so Steve Erceg, number 10, gets the shot, and it's he didn't earn it. He's just getting it. But I mean, me and you were talking before the stream. I was trying to think of all the people that didn't really earn their title shots, and it seems like they always win. It's Strickland, and just all these people, Juliana Pena. O'Malley, Juliana Pena, just all of these people that when you see they're getting the title shot, you're like, why are they getting the shot? And then they win.
Raquel Pennington.
Raquel Pennington. I mean, some people were saying Duplessis. I mean, the list could go on. You could argue deserving. I think that people build up getting a title shot so much in their head that you could argue no one ever deserves to get a title shot. Right. There's a short list of people that there's no debate they actually deserve it. You're always going to feel well, they don't deserve the title shot. So I mean, it's it's kind of a biased thing, but yeah, he didn't deserve it to earn it.
It's just, I mean, a lot of it is right place, right time, and a lot of it is business. And Erceg's the guy here. So either way, right? Just based on the fact that this is 5 rounds, let's talk about low risk contest first. Seems like a prototypical stack, right? Even if you do believe Pantoja gets him out of there early, prototypical stat for DraftKings low risk contest.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. Look at what Royval and Moreno scored in those 2 decision losses. They both scored 90 points.
Yeah.
So we're getting 230 points or something combined in the last 2 Pantoja fights. So I don't think you can expect that, but it's happened twice in a row. So you can't say it's not going to happen. It definitely could happen. But I think he's due for a finish. He's not just going to win a grappling heavy decision every time ever.
So here's that leads me perfectly into the next point for high risk contests. And You have him approaching 50% projected ownership, roughly, right, for Pantoja?
Yeah, slightly over right now.
All right, so the argument for being underweight, outside of the fact that he's a 50% owned fighter, and that's just generally what you need to do if you want to get different in tournaments, is step down in competition. If he does finish him early, we could end up with, let's look at Pantoja's game logs. If round one sub Perez was 100 points, that was quick. Round two sub against Royval was 99. And round one KO back in 2019, 110. So if he gets 100 to 110 in a quicker finish, still probably there at 8,800. But if it's ill timed or Erceg is competitive in round one, definitely different ways. Plus, the other side of this is, despite everything you've laid out, and if you read Jake's site, MMADFS.com, or read the Daily Plug, it sounds as if Pantoja is minus 1,000 here. But as you said, Erceg is plus 150. So despite everything that has been said, Erceg has a decent chance of winning this fight according to the betting markets. And to me, Jake, I know it's either 100% or bust. I don't argue with that at all. But I think if you're playing a more balanced approach, I think there's no choice from a game theory perspective and from the contextual, the situational factors here to be underweight on Pantoja in the largest field tournaments.
Yeah, I mean, I get that. I get that approach for sure. I do think that like there's not much merit in matching probably. Like if you
Sure.
just match, you're not going to have any edge in either direction. So you either want to go underweight or just like say like I'm going to go 100% and then just do all the different five fighter combinations around him and I'm going to have them and as long as I max enter these contests, I'm going to have the maximum edge with every combination as long as he wins. So I think you do one or the other. Yeah, I mean it doesn't if you just match, then you're having no edge on the field.
Right.
You're like, okay, we're just doing a 5-man lineup after this, basically.
Exactly. One final thought here before we move on, and we have spent a lot of time here on this main event, but it is important. We mentioned it a couple of weeks ago. The fight is escaping my mind here. But is this possible? I think it was Gagey Holloway, actually. Is it possible that if this goes 5 rounds and we see 70, 80, 90 points from Erceg, a fight stack could be in the optimal large field lineup?
I do think so, especially because, as I mentioned earlier, I don't think it's the best dog slate. At first it kind of looks like a decent dog slate because there's like some names, and you're like, oh, well, this guy, these guys pull off upsets a lot. But I can definitely see a scenario where only one dog wins, and then the fight stack ends up in the winner. I will say, every time we've ever said this could be a good fight stack slate, it has never once happened.
Just for the record.
just to be clear.
Well, I will say, so I was thinking the same thing, right? You see all these big favorites, right? We have multiple favorites over minus 400, minus 600, even a couple minus 600 favorites. And you can poke holes in some. It's like, oh, I could see this fighter potentially winning as an underdog, pulling off the upset. But you add all those probabilities together, it's still probably one, maybe two of the really big underdogs that end up winning. And that could end up the case. And if he scores 90 points in a decision loss, which again is the stealing outcome in a decision loss, but it's happened against Pantoja twice now, then even 90 points could potentially outscore some of these dogs, even in a win. So it is an interesting concept to think about. And as you watch this video, as we're recording Friday night, it gives you some hours to think about, maybe including those in some of your large field, high risk lineups. Now, let's move on. Let's talk about these newcomers. 3 on the card, no fights in the UFC, some on the Contender Series. Jake, let's start with the one fight where 2 are facing each other. We have Ernesta Karakaicha and Gianni Barbosa fighting each other. 2 contrasting styles. What did you see with these 2 fighters when you watched the tape?
Yeah, I mean, you pointed it out right there. Very contrasting styles. Barbosa is a 31-year-old former multi-time Brazilian national judo champion, only 6-2 in MMA, 3 finishes, has black belts in BJJ and judo. Good wrestling, decent submissions, but not like a crazy submission game. Has mostly been going the distance lately, but is coming off a first-round submission win on the Contender Series. Decent striker. If you look at her record, you can see she has a decision win over Karine Silva. Obviously, that's impressive. Karine Silva has been destroying people at 135 pounds. Barbosa is now a 125-pound fighter. She started her career at 135. She won that decision over Silva, and then she got knocked out in the second round by Josie Nunez. It's always funny when I'm taping these people and be like, I watched this fight like 4 years ago
Yeah.
and had no idea who she was or
Uh-huh.
whatever
Yep.
when we were doing Nunez. But yeah, so she dropped back. She dropped down to 125 after that knockout loss, and then she had a close decision loss with the LFA, and then since then she's been rattling off some wins, looking like a good grappler. I would say she's a really smart fighter. Like when she's going against a grappler, she uses her striking. When she's going against a striker, she uses her grappling. Good wrestling. You'll see her go for kind of these sort of unique takedowns where she like dives in and kind of trips people down. So I would say the one thing is when you have a wrestler going against a much taller striker, sometimes you can see them struggle to land takedowns, and that's what we have here. Ernesta is basically like a stretched out Gumby doll. Um, so it'll be interesting to see if that gives Barbosa any trouble in getting the fight to the ground. But it sets up as a great stylistic matchup for her because Ernesta is a one-dimensional Lithuanian kickboxer, 25 years old, crazy tall, long for the division, 5-0 and 1 with 2 finishes. Me and you actually haven't talked about her at all, but I was curious about your opinion. So
I'll
she's
tell you.
coming off the decision.
I'll
She's coming off the split decision win. Did you? How many of her split decisions did you think she won?
I thought one of the three. And so my comment was
Yeah,
for your nickname to be heavy handed, you have a lot of split decisions.
right, right. She's just like all of her fights are split decisions, and it's like, oh, she's gonna lose. Oh no, she won a split decision. Oh,
Yeah.
she's gonna lose this one for sure. Oh no, she won a split decision. Like it just kept happening. You're like, wait, what?
It
Like
is like she could have
the
been
judging was kind of
she could
crazy,
have had multiple split decision losses and not even been sniffing the UFC. Yet here she is.
right? Yeah, I mean, she's just getting controlled all the time by these wrestlers, and these wrestlers were coming in like 1-0, 0-0. She fought the same 38-year-old who's now like 41. She fought her twice. This like French wrestler. The other girl she fought was like literally 0-0, making her pro debut. And I mean, these people are still controlling her, taking her down. So clear hole in her grappling. Like she's a good striker, but can't wrestle, can't grapple. Just crazy tall and long. So when she gets taken down, she like wraps her arms and legs around you like an octopus because she has these crazy long limbs. So it's definitely a unique look, but yeah, she's the type of girl, she had that crazy high volume decision on the contender series where you see that and you're like, oh my God, so much scoring potential. And she was going against like a 3 softball player who also was a one dimensional striker and
Just
like had only been training MMA for like 2 years. So you get those matchups, it's great. Um, it's like Bahamondes, like
yes.
super tall striker with no grappling. Although Bahamondes has a good takedown defense, Ernesta does not. So she's going against the judo champion here in Barbosa. It looks like a terrible matchup on paper. So if we ever get Ernesta in a pure striking matchup, yeah, very interesting. But anytime she's facing a grappler, it's gonna be really hard to play her in DFS, and she's probably just gonna get controlled for the whole fight, if not submitted.
Yeah, I mean I've seen people on Twitter and whatnot and other content sites talk about Ernesta. Oh, look at her contender series. She has high volume upside. It was like you couldn't have picked a more perfect matchup to show that. Not to mention contender series stats are inflated. So this is the worst possible matchup, as you said. You have takedown defense issues and control against issues, and you're facing a judo champion, a legit judo champion. Not the best matchup in the world. So, all right, moving on. The other fighter we have, speaking of good matchups, is Mauricio Hufi, who low volume knockout guy, but he is facing probably one of the worst chins in the UFC right now. Mauricio, what did you see from him? Jake, I know you and I both watched the two fights where he fought in the same night, and competition probably could not have been worse. But what do you see from him? Do you see anything different? Do you see high upside in this matchup against Malarkey?
Yeah, I mean, Malarkey's chin seems gone at this point. So Mauricio, a 30-year-old Brazilian knockout specialist, 9-1. All 10 of his fights have ended in knockouts. Apparently, he was like a former bodyguard for some Chinese billionaire. So like people think highly enough to like protect their lives with him, which is
Okay.
that's like something out of a movie. Like
Yeah.
that now this guy's in the UFC. Um, super random, but coming off a late third round knockout on contender series, he was actually losing that fight, and it was like insanely low volume, slow paced. It was like Islam Makhachev, one of his training partners. So I don't know if the guy was just worried about like getting taken down or the fact he was a little undersized. That was at 170. He's dropping down to 155 now. Um, after the fight, he kept saying like, "Oh, that guy was huge. He was huge." So maybe he was like kind of timid, but it is concerning when you're that low volume and you don't add anything in terms of grappling. You're just so reliant on knockouts. And as I say that, then you get Jamie Malarkey, who's been knocked out in 3 of his last 6 fights, and he got knocked out by like Hack Press in his last match. Who's been this decision grinder. He got knocked out by the dude making his short notice debut up a weight
Oh boy.
class, Naimov. I mean, I can forgive the knockout loss to Jalen Turner, obviously, but I think that just sent Jamie Malarkey's career into like a spiraling out of control. I mean, he's just been a dumpster fire ever since then. But you do worry about, Hoopy cutting down, already having some durability concerns on the regional scene. We've seen him dropped multiple times, cutting down an extra 15 pounds now. But I mean, he's really powerful with his striking. He's just one of these like stereotypical guys. Like if he connects, he's probably going to get a knockout, and if he doesn't, he could score like 35 points in a decision or
Yes.
something and land like 30 strikes. So crazy wide spectrum of scoring here for him. And it's like a guy that you kind of want to be underweight on just based on the low volume and the no grappling. And then you see the matchup, you're like, oh man, it's like he's definitely gonna knock Malarkey out. But maybe not. Maybe Malarkey knocks him out. Maybe Malarkey dances around the octagon for 15 minutes and the fight totally busts. But I don't know, man. I think Malarkey is on his way out. Seems like basically done despite being 29 years old. So I kind of like the knockout upside here, but it is concerning the volume and the no grappling.
All right, well, let's discuss this here on stream because I've been debating this. This is the first round of the MMA Championship this weekend. It is basically a double up. Hoofi is going to be popular. He's $8,400. The line has moved in his favor. He has a near 50% knockout chance. That is just a recipe for high ownership, right? You and I have talked about the low
Right.
volume here. Very clear if he doesn't get an immediate round one knockout, or I mean, it doesn't get a round one knockout, he's scoring 80 or less. And if he doesn't get a knockout at all, he's scoring 30 or less. But you want to be underweight on a guy like this, but he could kill you in low risk contests. What are your thoughts here? $8,400. I think he'll be a guy that a lot of people end up using because of those Vegas metrics in low risk contests. What are your thoughts?
I think he's going to be super popular just based on the price and the odds. I think he could score like 90-ish points in a late second round knockout and still potentially be useful. But I think that's what he needs is a first round knockout or well timed second round. Like early second round knockout isn't going to be enough. Third round knockout isn't going to be enough. Decision isn't going to be enough. But it's just so hard to trust Jamie Malarkey. But at the same time, I feel like Jamie Malarkey is this guy that just screws you no matter what you do. You bet on him, you bet against him, you fade his fights, you play his fights. It's like he just finds ways to mess everything up because he's shown that he can ruin fights now. He's shown he can get immediately knocked out by people that never knock anyone out. And he hasn't knocked anyone out in a while. He knocked out Devontae Smith and Kama Worthy in like 2021. So maybe he could knock out. I don't know, man.
He's going to grapple for two
It's
rounds and get knocked out in round three here, and everyone loses.
yeah, I mean, it could definitely happen. It's tricky, man. It's tricky if you're in a spot like that where you have to make a binary choice. Like, do I play Hoofy or do I not?
Yeah,
It's definitely tricky. I do think he knocks Malarkey out. I don't know how helpful that is because everyone thinks he knocks him out, but
it's helpful
I'm
enough.
I'm on board. I'm on board with Malarkey getting knocked out, and ideally you can hedge in that situation if you have multiple tickets and you do like one with him and one fading the fight.
True. I think it's very fair. All right, let's play good fighter, bad fighter, good matchup, bad matchup. If you guys have questions, by the way, this is not a live show, but we happily answer them either in the comments below. So drop a question or a prediction for the card. Who do you think will be the highest scorer? Who do you think is going to be the fight of the night? Let us know in the comments, and we'll always answer your questions. Or you can join our Discord server, occupyfantasy.com/Discord. The link is in the description to chat with us and sweat out the fights with us every weekend. All right, good fighter, bad fighter, good matchup, bad matchup. This is brief. Jake will give one sentence whether this fighter is actually good or bad. And is this a good or bad matchup for DFS? Just gives more context than looking at their fight logs or just watching a couple of their fights. First fight of the night, Costa and Borjas. Are either of these guys good or bad? Is this a good or bad matchup for either?
I actually think Costa's kind of good, man. I think he's been kind of screwed in the UFC. He's had two short notice fights against highly ranked opponents. Amir Albazi, short notice debut, or pretty short notice debut, like 3.5 weeks notice.
And future
Gets knocked
champ.
out in the third round. And then his last fight was on short notice from Steve Erceg, and those are his only two losses in the UFC. Like he obliterated Jimmy Flick, which Jimmy Flick's terrible. So we really don't know because all of his spots have been super easy or super hard. But he's like Diego Lopez's like sidekick basically. So he's got to get some of the rub from all the finishes Lopez has lately. He's fighting for his job at 1-2. We see underdogs kind of struggle in that situation, but favorites generally tend to fare pretty well against the odds when they're fighting for their jobs there at 1-2. And I think it's a really favorable matchup. I think Boras has absolutely terrible grappling, and we just saw him absorb like 150 significant strikes in his debut against Josh Van. So I think Costa is striking upside. I think he's grappling upside. I think he's got sneaky submission upside here. I think he could armbar Boras in the first round potentially. Man, I'm 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 like I like Boras when he's in a striking battle, kind of like Ernesta. But when he's going against anyone that can grapple, I'm going to be fading this guy.
All right, so this is good fighter, bad fighter, good matchup that is supposed to be brief with one sentence each. Jake immediately broke all the rules. So let's try to get this down. Costa, good or bad matchup. Borjas, good or bad matchup.
I just wanted to talk about that fight because I feel like it's going to be low owned. Like they're both under 20%, and I
Oh, then
just
we
felt
love
like
that. Okay,
Costa needed to get talked about.
fair.
So that's why I wanted to talk about it. But Costa's a good fighter and a good matchup. Borjas is a bad fighter in a I'll say bad matchup as long as Costa grapples. Man, if Costa doesn't grapple,
Big if.
he's been knocked out a couple times. So it's it depends on if Costa shows up smart. I think he will, man. I think he's gonna come in with a good game plan. He's been fighting all grapplers, so now he gets a striker. He's gonna use his grappling. All right, I'm done. I'm done. That's it.
All right, now continuing the brief segment of good fighter, bad matchup, bad matchup. Ismael Bonfim, incredible debut against Terrence McKinney, then immediately lose to Benoit Saint Denis. Crazy matchups, by the way. Bonfim, good or bad matchup versus Pichel.
Yeah, and then he missed weight by 3.5 pounds in the last Brazil card when these two were supposed to fight the first time.
Yeah.
I still think Bonfim's good, but it's a bad matchup unless Pichel has gone off a cliff at 42 years old and coming off yet another hip surgery, which he very well could have. But if it's the Pichel from 4 years ago, it's a bad matchup.
All right, big if there. We'll see. Moving on, we have Elvis Brenner against who we got here? Yeah, Elvis Brenner against Mikkeltek Oralbai. I think I butchered his name. Miktebek Oralbai. There we go. Brenner versus Oralbai. Good or bad matchup for either good or bad fighters?
I was about to say great job on the pronunciation, but
Oh, thanks.
yeah, Oralbai is a good fighter. And I do think it's a good matchup. We saw Elvis Brenner get beaten on the mat by Gabriel Santos on the regional scene, and that was at 145 pounds. Gabriel Santos was coming up from 135 pounds at the time. It was his first fight at 145. Oralbai is coming down from 170. I mean, we'll see. They're the same height, but it just seems like Oralbai used to facing bigger guys. We've seen Brenner struggle against smaller guys. Oralbai's a good wrestler. So I think he's a good fighter. I think it's a good matchup, but Brenner just like defies the odds every single time. It seems like he's still undefeated in the UFC. He's been a plus 450 dog twice or whatever. So yeah, tricky one. I initially when I saw, I was like, oh, Brenner is a dog. We got the Brenner rule, and then I broke down the fight and I was like, all right, I'm going Oralbai by decision.
All right, next we have Yasmin Lucindo, 3 fights in the UFC. One of the biggest age gaps you could possibly find against Kovacevic here. Good or bad? Good or bad matchup?
Yeah, good fighter and a good matchup.
Easy. See there? That's how easy this game is. 2 words, very easy. And then finally, is that it, Jake? That's all we got? It is, right?
I mean, we can do Steve Erceg if you want.
Bad fighter, bad matchup?
That's right.
See, you do these shows enough with Jake, you figure it out. So, all right, guys, let's move on here and we'll talk about our Underdog Pick'em play of the slate. If you're not already, make sure you sign up for Underdog Fantasy. If it's eligible in your state, use promo code Occupy to get a 100% deposit match bonus up to $100. Deposit 100, get $100, which is great because one, you could do these UFC Pick'em slips. 2, best ball just dropped and everyone who loves football is drafting. They literally best ball contests have already filled, which is crazy. It's May 3rd, for Christ's sakes. Best ball contests are filling. And in some states, they have Pick'em Champions, which is kind of similar to DraftKings Pick 6 if you've been playing that. But you do Pick'em slips against competition. Really great way to play that format. So make sure you check out Underdog Fantasy if you haven't already. Jake, which line on Underdog stood out to you this week?
Yes, I saw this line. I thought it was interesting because you can never get lower than 0.5 finishes at even money, whatever you want to call it, no negative multiplier. So I saw that and I was like, yeah, of course I'll take that. So Kyle Barallo, lower than 0.5 finishes at, even straight up, not get screwed on the odds line.
Love that. Love that. For a guy who has 4 decisions in the UFC against Paul Craig here, we'll see how this fight plays out. But again, anytime you get under a half finish for someone like this with no odds essentially attached to it, you got to like that. All right, fight that you have to target in DFS, Jake. We've talked about a lot of fights here, but if you had to say a fight that Someone's making 20 lineups, so they're making 3 lineups. Whoever wins this fight is likely to be in the winning lineup. Which fight would you pick?
Yeah, it's definitely it's gonna be Joe Anderson, Brito, and Jack Shore.
Love that. And this is one for me. Shore ranks higher in our model for the grappling upside and just the volume itself, but there's no denying that Brito could just eliminate him easily. We saw the physicality difference of Ricky Simone against Jack Shore. This seems like a tough spot to play Jack Shore, but I imagine if he can outlast Brito, if he can survive the onslaught, he could turn this over late. Is that what you're seeing too?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think, Brito's big favorite in round one to just totally nuke him. Round two gets a little bit dicier. Either guy could win. If it gets to round three, I think that's where Shore can take over, probably get him out of there. It's just not a lot of ways this fight fails. Another like weird second round finish, kind of like Brito's last fight against Jonathan Pierce, where he gets controlled for the whole fight and he gets a sub. Like, sure, that's always possible. That's possible in any fight. I just
Right.
think there's such a good chance that we either get a Brito finish in the first half or a Shore finish in the second half. And, Shore with a late finish, even if he doesn't have a great start, as cheap price tag's probably going to be enough. I'm still not sold on Jack Shore at 145, man. I think he should have stayed at 135. He just looks like he's just not really cutting much weight anymore. He doesn't look like he's in good shape. I don't know, man. I thought he was an interesting prospect at 135, so I'm on Brito here, but I think he definitely got a hedge with Shore.
All right, fair enough. All right, let's close it out with our stream parlay of the week. I'll pick a side total or prop. Jake will pick one as well. We will parlay it together. Pretty big one this week. We haven't talked about the Michel Pereira fight. He's up against one of your favorite fighters in Ihor Potieria, Jake. Pereira, I'm going to say round one sub. I mean, you look at early in the week, you were trying to find value on this fight, and you were like, dude, Michel Pereira is minus 250 inside the distance, which is just crazy. Uh, Most expensive fighter on the card. We've seen him club and sub. We know Potiera sucks in many areas. Grappling is one of them. I'll go with the bigger odds here. And I'll say Michel Pereira round one sub. I believe it's plus 650 last time we checked.
Plus 700 now. It actually went up as the week went on
Hey, there we go.
for a guy. And now his inside the distance line is negative 280. So pretty big gap there.
Crazy. My God. Yeah. And again, for a guy who can sub, we've seen it a couple times in his career. Obviously, we saw it in the last fight out. When you have that big of an inside the distance number, and you can get some pretty big odds on one of the outcomes over the other, I think it's always worth the value of taking a shot at that. So I'll use that as my leg of the parlay. What are you going to pair it with?
Yeah, I mean, it's worth a shot. I agree with the books. The KO is more likely, but sub's definitely in play. What we were just talking about. I'm going to go Brito round one at plus 310. I think that's like a huge part of his win condition. He's a negative 185 favorite. He basically has like 2 rounds of cardio. So, is he going to get a finish in round one or round two? Or is he going to get finished himself later on? But yeah, I'll go Brito round one plus 310. The parlay is plus 3180.
Plus 3180. We can get a pretty nice vehicle if we hit this one. So if you want to tail it, let us know if you do. And now you can sweat it out with us in Discord. That'll do it for this video. For those of you that have watched all the way through, we appreciate you. If you want that extra edge, we know a lot of you just watch these videos for free. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. If you're the type of person that wants that extra edge, whether it's for betting or DFS, and you don't mind paying for it, make sure you check out our sites, MMADFS.com and OccupyFantasy.com. MMADFS.com, Jake has premium content. Some of these bets where he talks about the line moving, he gives the bets earlier in the week so you can get ahead of those line moves. He also writes up every single fight from a betting and DFS perspective, plus more premium content, so go check that out. And then OccupyFantasy.com is where he comes over and writes the daily plug. Best plays for DFS, lineup construction tips, best remaining bets. Our Occupy model, using our data modeling, predicts fighter performance for FanDuel and DraftKings. Plus, our lineup builder allows you to build up to 300 lineups using our custom rules and optimal criteria. Check it out if you want that extra edge in MMA, DFS, or betting. So for Jake at MMA at DFS_MMA on Twitter, I'm at Brian Jester FF. If you're not already, make sure you subscribe to the channel. It is free to do so, and that gets you notified whenever we upload these videos every Friday or Saturday. Last free way, we'll ask you to support. Give us a thumbs up. Easiest way to support the channel. So for Jake, I'm Brian. Thank you for listening. Good luck and enjoy UFC 301.